People who escape poverty. What was your biggest culture shock? People sending their kids to summer camps and paying for music lessons, sports lessons, private tutoring, etc. I never had music lessons growing up because we couldn't afford it, never learned how to swim, never went to summer camp, never did anything interesting. Now my kids have all those things, and it just seems like they're so privileged to have those opportunities to learn so much cool stuff and have so many great experiences.
It's interesting to think about how different things can be from one generation to the next. I had a friend who grew up with similar limitations. He always wanted to play guitar but couldn't afford lessons. Now, he makes sure his kids have access to music, sports, and camps. It's kind of fulfilling to see how he's able to give them experiences he wished he had. It's a big change.
Before we had a computer, and the school teacher requires us to submit a paper, my classmates would hand in their papers printed out. As for me, I would have to write down the paper, but because I have poor handwriting, I will ask my older sister to handwrite my paper neatly. And the first time we bought a computer, which came with a free printer, I was really excited to make school assignments. It was overwhelming, really, to know that you can write your paper on a keyboard, format it, and then print it. And then there's word art. Even if it was not encouraged, I typed the titles of my papers in word art. My friends thought it was funny, but I didn't care. It's word art.
I remember the days before computers too. Everyone was turning in neatly typed papers, and I was struggling with my messy handwriting. My sister helped me out by writing my papers for me. When we finally got a computer, it was a game changer. I could type everything up, and word art was just the icing on the cake. My friends laughed, but I thought it was awesome to add some flair to my work.
Actually buying things, if that sounds weird. I'm so used to saving and not having that I forget that I can afford a new pair of glasses if I break my old ones. After being in a position or poverty, you learn to deal with stuff that most people would view as inconvenient. I've been teased on a few occasions because I'll go without stuff even though I can get things for myself now that I'm an adult.
It's interesting how our past shapes our actions. I had a friend who went through something similar. After struggling for years, they found it hard to enjoy the little things. Even when they could finally buy what they wanted, they still hesitated. It's almost like a switch flips in your mind. Moving from saving to spending takes time, and it's okay to take it slow. It's just a different mindset to adjust to.
The way people talk, just hearing people talk about things like drinking green tea and how they bought new kitchen countertops this weekend and casually dropping shit like that time I was in Thailand seems silly, but at first it was weird hearing people talk like the people on TV. I also realized I have an absolutely filthy mouth. I didn't realize the way I talked was so bad, but am by far the most inappropriate person in my workplace.
It's funny how conversations can vary so much. Some people discuss mundane topics like home improvement, while others have wild stories that sound straight out of a movie. I guess I relate to that feeling of being pretty loose with words. I've caught myself dropping casual jokes at work, and it definitely sets me apart. Sometimes I wonder if I should tone it down, but it's just who I am.
My family was quite poor when I was a young child. We were never homeless, but we did sometimes skip a meal or two, or maybe live without electricity or running water for a while. I got used to that lifestyle, and I took care of the things I had, and I learned to repair things that were broken. I joined the military after high school, and I couldn't believe all of the people my age who would waste food or throw things away that weren't even broken. I also found it quite amusing when the barracks had no hot water, heat, etc. Many people lost their minds.
It's interesting how experiences shape our perspectives. Growing up teaches you the value of what you have. Seeing others waste things can be frustrating, especially when you know what it's like to go without. The military must have been a real eye-opener, especially when your peers reacted to basic discomforts. It makes you appreciate resilience and the little things, you know?
Going from every dollar being important to fairly cost-insensitive is a big change. It's great not to sweat meals out or worry about bills, and being able to save fairly large sums for investment or major purchases. It's nice to be able to buy the nicer things that will last instead of the shittiest version of everything and needing to replace lots of shit, and always wishing I could upgrade. It's nice having a frame for my bed, an apartment of my own, and not having to go to a laundromat. It's fantastic that I can help my family and give them gifts or money or pay for stuff when we hang out. It's just nice. People who tell you money isn't that important have either always had it or never had it. It's pretty fucking important.
I can relate to the shift in perspective when money isn't as tight. I remember living paycheck to paycheck, constantly stressing about every expense. Now, being able to treat myself and others feels pretty good. Having my own space and not relying on public laundry makes life a lot smoother. It's eye-opening to see how much stress money can bring or take away. It really does change your outlook on things.
Clothes. The fact that people actually spend hundreds of dollars on clothes. For one shirt, they're willing to shell out $80, which is the monetary equivalent of 8 meals at McDonald's or 2 weeks' worth of groceries. Side note, when I was younger, we'd go to thrift shops to buy clothes. Once 2008 to 2009 came around, it was suddenly cool to buy clothes at thrift shops. I'm guessing it still is. It kind of upset me once I realized it was finally cool to buy hand-me-downs because back then, I'd lie to other kids my age when they'd ask what store I got my clothes from because I was so ashamed that they were from the Goodwill. I've never had the luxury of buying a shirt for $80, and I'll never spend that money on a shirt even if I had all the money in the world. It's such an extravagance.
I get what you mean. It's strange how trends change. Thrift shopping was something we did out of necessity. Then it became trendy. I remember feeling embarrassed, too, trying to hide where my clothes came from. Now, people flaunt vintage finds like a badge. I can't imagine spending that much on a shirt. The value of a meal or some groceries feels way more important than a piece of fabric.
I am in my 40s, so this dates me a little. My mother always switched price tags when we shopped. This was before barcode scanning. I thought it was normal and did it myself until I found out it was illegal while in my early teens. Also, a huge culture shock was how wasteful the world can be. We used everything until it was absolutely useless, and throwing food away was a sin.
That's an interesting take on shopping back then. Sounds like your mom had her own way of getting deals. It's crazy how times change too. Now, it feels like waste is just part of life for many people. I can relate to that feeling of not wanting to waste things, especially food. It's good to see more people acknowledging that now, though.
In poverty, the definition of rich is anyone not completely poor. Your parents' car is not 15 years old. The paint is actually glossy and not peeled and matte. None of your utilities are off. You are rich. That's how it was when I grew up. You call so many people rich when truly they are not and have problems of their own.
That's an interesting take on wealth. It really puts things into perspective. I remember a friend from the same background who always looked at those around us and thought they had it made. But everyone has their own struggles, even if it doesn't show. It's easy to assume someone is doing well just by appearances, but life has its challenges for everyone, no matter the surface.
Wow, a question I can answer. My biggest shock has been watching people who grew up with financial stability talk to their kids about money. Money for me as a kid was something to cause anxiety. We never had enough. Not enough to eat, not enough to pay bills, not enough to live really. When I see my friends with their kids now, we all make more than a decent living. Their relationship with money is so strategic and thoughtful. How am I going to make the most out of what I have? How to show my kids how to come out ahead and make good financial choices. These were not the lessons I learned. Mine were based around collecting things for safety. If I can afford this now, Or even if I can't, can I get it now and I could sell it if something goes wrong? I still find myself fighting the urge to buy my kids everything because I could. Not literally, of course. But it doesn't even matter to them. I realize I'm not buying them stuff. I'm buying stuff for a little anxious me. Hesitant face.
It's interesting how financial backgrounds shape our views. I grew up with a similar mindset about money, always worried if there'd be enough. My friends now seem to have a different approach, focusing on teaching their kids about savings and investments. I sometimes catch myself wanting to give my kids things I couldn't have, but in the end, I know it's just my old anxieties surfacing. It's a mix of wanting to protect them and understanding what really matters.
There hasn't been much of a culture shock as it's been a slow, steady climb up. I've had plenty of time to acclimate. It's more like a series of pleasant surprises for me. Doing things that cost a lot up front, yet save money in the long run, is a cool feeling. Like a trip to Costco, for example. I can buy $200 worth of chicken, veggies, etc. instead of just eating the dollar menu at MCD's every day. Being able to afford an XB1 and have furniture that matches is a fun perk too.
It's interesting how adapting to a new lifestyle feels gradual rather than jarring. Finding ways to spend a bit more now to save later makes sense. A Costco trip really highlights that shift. And getting an Xbox One and matching furniture is a nice touch, reflecting a certain level of stability and growth. It's cool to see how little changes can lead to a more comfortable life over time.
I could just buy a video game whenever I want, and I can have fast food whenever I want. I can wear clothes that fit me. I can just do things because I want to do them. I have no idea why it was such a foreign concept to me. I guess I never realized that it was even possible. Blew my mind one day when my buddy was like, hey, let's go watch a movie in X City. And I could actually say, yeah, let's do that. Like, just drive 20 minutes on a whim, get dinner, watch a movie. Biggest shock of growing up for me, honestly.
It's wild how simple things can hit you hard. I remember when a friend suggested we just hit the arcade one weekend. I was surprised I could actually say yes, no plans needed. We went, played some games, grabbed burgers afterward, just enjoying the moment. It felt freeing to realize I could make those choices anytime. Funny how growing up opens up little adventures you never thought you'd have.
Having a fridge and pantry full of food that I like never gets old. Growing up, there was not much to eat, and it was mostly crap. It's been at least a decade since I lived like that, but I still open up my pantry and marvel at all the treats and options. There's really nothing like being well-nourished.
It's nice to hear how much you appreciate having good food around. I remember when I used to eat whatever was available, and it wasn't always great. Now, having a stocked fridge feels like a small win. I also find myself enjoying the variety. It's funny how something so simple can make a big difference in how we feel day to day. Being well-nourished really does change the game.
That places like Red Lobster and Outback Steakhouse aren't places you dress up to go to. I was out on a date with the guy who would eventually be my husband. We were starting to get hungry, and he suggested grabbing food and brought up Red Lobster. I told him I wasn't sure, I wasn't dressed good enough for it. He sort of boggled at me and said I was fine. I went in and was so self-conscious until I saw that there were guys eating there that looked like they walked straight off a construction site. I'm still getting used to being okay buying stuff for myself, especially frivolities like clothes and makeup. I used to like to go to the mall to window shop. It still irritates my husband when I see something I like, go up to it, say something like, hey, they have this in my size. And wow, the price is really reasonable. I would love to wear this at, insert event or place here. Then turn and walk away. It seems to be a struggle for him to convince me that I can in fact buy clothes that cost more than $15.
I can relate to that feeling of needing to dress up for certain places. I had a similar experience when I went to a restaurant with my partner. I stressed about how I looked, but once we arrived, it was clear that everyone was just there to enjoy their meal. It was a reminder that it's more about having a good time than fitting some expectation. And yeah, that guilt over buying nice things is tough to shake off.
What shocked me, and continues to shock me, is how little interest the people around me have in wanting to help others. When I was poor, the family friends were always helping each other, and when we had any extra money, we'd buy new school supplies for the poorer kid across the street. Our neighbors donated food and clothes to the church drives. Now I'm surrounded by people with lots of disposable income, and they just go out to nice restaurants every day and buy all the new tech gadgets. None of my coworkers donate to anything or volunteer for anything. It's crazy to see all this money and no desire to help anyone. I guess since they were never in need themselves, they can't picture what just donating $100 worth of toiletry supplies to the local women's shelter can do for people, or what donating toys regularly to the refugee center can do for those kids who have nothing.
Yeah, it's pretty wild how money can change perspectives. I've noticed the same thing around me. People seem so focused on their own plans and possessions, like that's all that matters. When I was growing up, sharing was more common. It's frustrating to see folks with resources not using them to help out. Maybe they just don't realize the impact they could have if they cared a bit more.
So, I'm not never work again wealthy, but I do well. I'm one of 7 kids, and we were pretty poor. Not fear for your life poor, but poor with a certain social safety net, American poor. I since got a good degree without debt, have a stable job, married a financially stable dude, and am in no debt. To the world, that's pretty rich. Anyway, the biggest thing, for me, is social legitimacy. When you have a little bit of money, you can do things that you couldn't before. Knowing that you have a safety net makes you more ballsy and confident and less at people's mercy. Things like buying a new top for an interview are huge. The other thing you can do when you're well off is plan ahead, save, make better financial decisions. Between those two things, I truly understand now the privileges that I have.
It's interesting how financial stability shifts your perspective. Growing up with less makes those small victories feel monumental. I remember when I got my first real paycheck, it felt surreal. Just being able to afford basics without worry changes everything. It allows for planning and better choices, which I didn't have before. Now, even minor purchases feel empowering. Realizing these privileges shapes how I see opportunities and other people's struggles.
I'm sort of moving into the process. I'm about to marry a guy whose family had it well off. They both work in the medical field, take 2-week vacations every year, sometimes more than once. They have season tickets to games, kids got new cars at 16, my fiancé and his sister Big have college paid for by the parents. They're not rich snobs, but sometimes I notice little things. I grew up where we learned to shop efficiently, bought cheap things, had parents excited to have jobs with insurance, moved probably 10+ times. We were never bottom of the barrel, but I could always tell that we were different. So getting into this family, going shopping with the future mother-in-law, we were buying hot dogs, cheap food, and I picked up the dollar ones, and she and my sister-in-law were like, "Why would you grab those?" And made me put them away so they could grab the $5 pack. It's not much, but it does make me realize we have a very different state of mind on things.
I get where you're coming from. It's interesting how families have different perspectives on money and what things are worth. You can feel the contrast in those small moments, like choosing hot dogs. It's a reminder of your upbringing and values. It might take some adjustment to fit in, but everyone's got their way of seeing things. Just try to find common ground and embrace the differences.
This thread makes me feel like an ungrateful prick. I mean, damn, we weren't rich, but I never even came close to being hungry. I wasn't sporting $80 Lacoste polos, but I sure as hell wasn't wearing socks with holes in them. And if I ever needed anything, I got it promptly. So many cute childhood memories. Bike rides with my mom, eating freeze pops with friends in the summer. That wouldn't have happened if my parents couldn't afford to feed me. Damn.
It's interesting how we often overlook the basics we had growing up. I wasn't rich either, but I had what I needed. I think about bike rides and hanging out with friends too. Those small moments create a lot of good memories. It's easy to focus on what we didn't have instead of appreciating the good times and support we did receive. Sometimes we just need to reflect on those simple joys.
The first year we were dating, I bought my husband something I thought was a small birthday gift. He had been talking about trying to make more food at home, but he was strapped for time. I bought him a crock pot, a basic one with no fancy features. I didn't want to do something big because we had only been dating a few months. He cried. Not full-on sobs, but very teary. He just turned 25, and no one had ever bought him a birthday present. I was 22 and had led a very sheltered life. It never crossed my mind that this was so out of the ordinary for him. That conversation just broke my heart. Even now, when I think about it, I just want to give him a hug and bake him a cake.
It's interesting how a simple gift can have such an impact. I remember giving a friend a book for their birthday. They weren't used to getting presents either, and it made them really emotional. It's moments like these that show how small gestures can mean a lot. It reminds me that not everyone has had the same experiences, and it really puts things into perspective. Simple things sometimes make the biggest difference.
Saving. And holidays. I'm sure as hell not wealthy. I'm on minimum wage, in fact, but grew up in some pretty horrific conditions for a portion of my childhood. The one thing that sticks out to me as all kinds of insane once I finished uni was, I can save, and within a few years, I've become in a position where this month, I'll be paying off the last of my debts, all bar my student loan, which I don't count as a personal debt. I can be debt-free, just like that. And I can save and go on a holiday. I never went on one until I was 23. I'm nearly 25 now, and I've been on 2 holidays, and it's freaking magical. The whole experience, even waiting for hours in an airport. I can go on a plane and see the tops of mountains. I can go in a sea that's warm. I can see a sandy beach. I can hear other languages in their native countries. The excitement is almost too much from the moment I even begin to think about a holiday.
It's interesting how life changes. Growing up in tough spots can really shape your perspective. Now that you're getting financially stable, it's cool to see how saving can lead to freedom. Those first holidays must feel like a big deal, especially after everything. Just the idea of flying and being in a completely new place can be liberating. Sounds like those moments mean a lot to you. Enjoy every bit of it.
Older teens who don't appreciate school. Excuse me? Your family is spending what amount of money for your private high school, and you don't do your goddamn work? I went to a school in Vietnam that had holes in the ground for toilets. Kids wore face masks so that they didn't inhale the huge amounts of mosquitoes. School was from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. Many kids went directly to work after class. And every single one of those kids worked there, but's off because they genuinely wanted to learn in order to better their lives. Biggest culture shock to this day.
I get what you're saying. It's wild how some teens take their education for granted. I used to know someone who would complain about school while others would fight for the chance to learn, you know? Makes you appreciate the effort some put in just to have those opportunities. Different environments really shape how we see things. It's a big reminder of just how lucky some of us really are.
How in debt a lot of upper middle class people are. I work my way up, have a great job, and I still think, how the fuck can they afford that? I know I make more than they do, and I can't afford trips to Hawaii and a new Cadillac. Then I realized all of that shit goes in credit cards. Or, how much the well-to-do get a hand up from their parents. Even if it's just connection, or getting your first car, or going to good schools. I had to work for all of that from scratch.
It's interesting how appearances can be deceiving. I know people who seem to have it all, but they're drowning in debt. It's crazy to see how credit cards fund those fancy lifestyles. Meanwhile, I've worked hard to get where I am without any financial help. It's a different kind of struggle when you don't start with a safety net. It makes you appreciate what you've achieved a bit more.
My grandmother, who is a millionaire now, had an awful childhood. Her father ran off with her when she was a baby, and when he got remarried, he eventually ran off with my 13-year-old grandma again and left her at this motel room. She had her first period during this and only had access to one maxi pad. To this day, she still is so embarrassed to think of who found it in her motel room, drawer tucked away in Kleenex, for the next time she possibly needed it.
That's a heavy story. It shows how tough life can be for some people. It's interesting to think about how those experiences shape a person later on. Now, having made it to millionaire status, it's a testament to her resilience. It's crazy how something so personal can still bring embarrassment after all these years. Life really throws some curveballs.
Two things really stand out for me. One, I didn't realize how bad of a neighborhood I grew up in until I got out of it and saw the other places. To me, growing up with junkies on the corner, crackheads in the alley, police cruising by all the time, etc. was just normal. I've told my fiancée and her family several stories from when I was a kid, and they look at me with horror, but to me, these are just normal kid things. It never really dawned on me how crazy and not normal my childhood was until I got out of there. Two, the other thing that stood out to me was eating breakfast for dinner. Growing up, we were dirt poor, and during really bad months, we'd have breakfast for dinner several times a week. For me and my brothers, this was great, pancakes for dinner. It was only when I was older and went away to college and realized that only poor people do this because it's cheap.
It's interesting how perspective changes. Growing up in a tough neighborhood just seemed normal to you. Those experiences shaped you, but it took moving away to see things differently. And breakfast for dinner? It sounds like a fun memory, but also a reminder of the struggles you faced. It's funny how what feels normal in childhood can reveal deeper truths about your situation later on. Makes you appreciate those simpler, yet challenging times.
The fact that my son is going to grow up in our 2-story home on a cul-de-sac in a nice neighborhood and never know what it's like to be 5 years old living in a station wagon, eating soup made from ketchup packets stolen from restaurants. Sometimes that realization hits me and I just break down and cry. I'm so glad I can give him more than I had.
It's touching to see how far you've come. Growing up in tough situations leaves a mark, but now you get to provide your son with stability. Every parent wants better for their kids. Those moments of reflection can be overwhelming, but they're a sign of love and care. It's good to know he's in a safe place, making memories in a home filled with warmth.
Someone already took my wick cheese answer, so the second biggest thing I guess was driving without giving it a second thought. I remember walking a couple of miles to the grocery store with a wagon so that my dad would have enough gas for the week to get to work. To this day, I still feel really uncomfortable driving somewhere if it's less than 5 miles.
It's funny how those early experiences stick with you. Having to walk to the store with a wagon just to save gas sounds pretty tough. It makes sense why you feel uneasy driving short distances now. Those memories shape our habits in ways we don't always realize.
People complaining about money. I don't understand. I can't understand. I know people with household incomes of $200K, low end, and up, and they complain about money? How? How can you possibly not have enough money with that? I make noticeably less than that. I make good money, don't get me wrong, but it's nowhere near that. And yet I have more money than I know what to do with. I mean, I have an aversion to spending money on a lot of stuff. See my other comment on buying clothes. But I make sure all my bills get paid. And I have so much money set aside for food each week. And I never even use it all because I intentionally budget more than I need. And then I just have a whole bunch left. I have some weeks where I cover all my basics and I just have so much extra money left. So I just put some in savings and the rest on top of my normal student loans. And the next paycheck shows up, and I just do it again. And then, these people are complaining they don't have enough money? What the actual fuck is this?
It's pretty wild. I know people who earn a lot but still stress about money. I get it, you might have expenses, but it seems off. I make less than some of them, but I manage fine. I budget well, pay my bills, and still have money left over. It feels like some people just don't know how to handle what they earn. I can't wrap my head around the complaints.
This is most likely going to get buried, but I've lived in a third world country that is considerably poverty-stricken and filled with corrupt politicians who could care less about people's rights. I was lucky to have been born into a middle-class family, but I lived close enough to those who weren't as wealthy. One thing I can say with certainty about my people is that we work hard. I've been living in North America for about 5 to 6 years now, and I'm dumbfounded of how some people don't value opportunities that are presented to them as much. The choice of a better future at the palm of their hands, and it just gets shunned.
It's interesting how perspective changes with experience. Living in a poverty-stricken area really highlights the value of hard work and opportunity. It's something not everyone appreciates, especially when they haven't seen the tough side of life. I have friends who sometimes take things for granted, and it makes me reflect. Those lessons stay with you, no matter where you are. It's a reminder that not everyone has the same chances.
I am not wealthy or economically stable, but I was struggling years ago. I was born and raised in a village in Mexico where there was no electricity, so I didn't hear about home appliances until years later. To me, one of the biggest shocks were escalators. They were fucking metallic staircases in motion. Seriously, that blew my mind when I first visited a mall-like store in the capital. Then it was the microwave. It was a crazy concept to me. You put something in a box, twist a knob, and bam, it was hot. Sometimes the most ordinary things blew my mind. I still don't know how most appliances or electronic devices work. I just accept the fact that they do. So in a way, I was desensitized from feeling wonder and curiosity.
That's a pretty relatable experience. Growing up without certain things can really change your perspective. I remember when my friend first saw a smartphone. It was like watching a kid at a theme park. He couldn't believe he could call someone and see their face at the same time. It's interesting how something ordinary for many can be completely new for others. Sometimes, it makes you appreciate these things more.
I guess more trashiness than pure poverty, but it was really weird how mellow normal people are. Go to work, spend time with family, do a hobby, sleep, etc. Growing up, every single day would be a huge ordeal. Car running out of gas on highway, electricity getting turned off, neighbors calling cops from screaming, having bad luck, etc. It's still kind of surreal how stress-free life is away from that environment.
It's interesting how life can be so different for people. Some seem to have it all together, while others deal with chaos daily. I had a friend who lived in that kind of environment. Always had some crisis happening, whether it was money issues or loud fights next door. Now, they've moved to a calmer place and often say it feels like a dream. Just goes to show how location can change your mindset.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love,